I'm a member at Mount Auburn United Methodist Church. And in 2019, I did get myself somehow, it just was a whole series of events where somebody talked me into volunteering to see if I would be if elected as a General Conference delegate. And so in 2019, at the annual conference, I was one of the 8 lay people elected as a General Conference delegate, and we've been meeting as a delegation at least every 2 months ever since then, thinking we're going to eventually get to have a General Conference, and it just doesn't happen. So anyway, and I'm a civil engineer and retired from Duke Energy, my wife and I just celebrated our 50th anniversary about last month, and we have 3 children and 8 grandchildren, and so that's good. So anyway, this is what I do now, and I'm 70 years old, and I thought, well, I thought I'd be slowing down a lot more, but now I'm talking 4 or 5 times a week, all over the state, north and south. In fact, multiple times I've gone from, like the worst case was I went from speaking right after the worship service in Decatur to an evening presentation in Poseyville, which is just barely north of Evansville. Mm-hmm. So I drove from Decatur to Evansville in one day for a presentation. So anyway, it's just what it is. People want to know. People are just interested, and I know a lot about what's going on because of being a General Conference delegate. So, and you can see from this first slide that I used to tell people changes are coming, because I've been talking. This is my 12th version of this presentation. I keep tweaking it, but I've been giving a version of this presentation for about 1.5 years. And this is, I think, the 86th presentation I've given in that time frame. But now I have to just say changes are here. Things are happening rapidly. If you're not aware, a little over 1 year ago, we had 9 churches in Indiana that disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church. Last month, we had 29 more. Out of those 29, I was aware of 7 of those, because 7 of those were churches I had been working with. I had no idea about the other 28, 22. I didn't know never even heard of most of them. And the reason that might be important is right now I have a list of 76 churches that are at some stage of disaffiliation process. So that means to me that there are probably somewhere between 150 and 200 churches in Indiana are going through this disaffiliation process. They won't all get out, they won't all decide to leave, and they won't all, some of them might not make the deadlines, and so I don't know exactly what it means except that there's a keen interest. So the thing I want to try to do tonight is just help you understand why those churches might be deciding to do that. What is going on that's causing them to consider leaving the United Methodist Church? And it has to do, and I'll show you some examples, but it really has to do with churches are looking at, and this is really, I think, the proper way to think about this. Churches are looking at what it is they consider to be their purpose as a church for their membership and for their community. What are you here to try to do? And then, in other words, what is your vision and mission for your church and your setting here? And then you look at where the United Methodist Church is and more importantly, where is it going? What is the vision and mission of the United Methodist Church in the next 4, 5, 10 years? And does it help or hurt your mission? Is it moving the same direction you're moving, or are you moving with it or not? Are you aligned with the denominational happenings? And so I think ultimately people are looking and saying, no, theologically we're not aligned, and certainly organizationally the United Methodist Church is in chaos, so we're definitely not aligned with that. So that's what's causing people to think about it. I want to just show you some examples of that as we go through this. And I'm going to try to walk through reasonably quickly. This can take anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour, because I just get wound up sometimes. I'm going to try to avoid that tonight and do it all in 30, 35 minutes. I'm not off to a very good start because I'm already too wordy. But anyway, I'm not going to belabor this, but I think you know probably, if you haven't read about this, you probably know intuitively what a traditionalist, a centrist, and a progressive is. And these are labels, and people hate labels. And the reason is because labels are never accurate, right? I mean, nobody really fits a label perfectly. And so people hate to be labeled, but they are helpful for having a meaningful discussion. Because, you say, well, is this person coming at this from a traditionalist perspective or a centrist perspective or a progressive perspective? And a lot of centrists are really institutionalists, and this would describe most of the bishops in the U.S. Their primary goal is to keep the institution together, and so they, it's not that they don't care about theology, it's just that they're willing to live with a lot of different theological points of view all under the same roof so that the institution can hang together. Let's all hang together regardless of what different kind of beliefs we have under this big tent. And so that I just want to make sure, I'm going to be using these terms as we go along, so I just want you to have an understanding. Traditionalist is more of, what you might call conservative, but labels like liberal and conservative are too closely tied to politics, and this has nothing to do with politics. This is all theological. Now, I do want to explain this because I think people believe that the whole issue is the homosexuality issue. And for some people it might be, but for most of the people that I know that are trying to disaffiliate, that's not the most important issue. And then we get accused, people like myself, who, I'm a traditionalist, and so people like myself get accused of being homophobic or being haters, and it's just not true, and I don't really know any sincere Christian traditionalists who are. So I want to walk through real quickly, what do traditionalists believe about LGBTQ plus persons? And it starts with the basic belief that the scripture teaches that marriage is between one man and one woman. And that's a traditionalist point of view. Progressives in the United Methodist Church and others would say no, marriage can be between any two people. But a traditionalist view is one man and one woman. But traditionalists also agree that all individuals are of sacred worth and are beloved by God. Everybody is of sacred worth, is an image bearer of God, has the potential to be an image bearer of God. And so all of sacred worth. And because of that, everybody should be treated with dignity and respect. We don't mistreat anybody. We don't want to mistreat any LGBTQ plus person. They should be welcome in our churches and deeply loved just like anybody else in your congregation. If you have LGBTQ plus persons in your congregation, I hope you give them a big hug when they come in. I love you. Great to have you here. Come sit beside me. Come join my, this ministry we've got, where, our food pantry or our volunteering at some children's ministry or something. Come, let's do this together. Be part of our congregation. We love you. And I agree 100% with the United Methodist Church's stance that encourages parents and grandparents and family members, do not ostracize your LGBTQ plus family members. Don't mistreat them. Invite them to Thanksgiving dinner. Give them a big hug. Celebrate their birthdays. The whole thing, because they are deeply loved like all the rest of us. But we believe they are sinners, just like I am, just like all of you are, and that they are not uniquely sinful, and they're not somehow further from God's grace than the rest of us. Mm-hmm. They just have a different sin temptation than what I have or what others have. Everybody has their own unique sin temptations. So that, I think, is a good traditionalist understanding. And because we're all sinners, we all stand in need of the transforming power of Christ. And so, yes.
Sorry for interrupting, but I was just wondering if, can we get a copy of this
Yes.
PowerPoint afterwards? So Mark, maybe you don't have to make, it might save you some time.
Yes, absolutely. I can email it to whoever. I'll email it to whoever you say email it to.
I know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then if that's not the biggest theological, it is obviously a theological difference between traditionalists and progressives, but if that's not the biggest one, what is it? And it really has to do, from my point of view, that the fact that United Methodism was created right from the start as a theological Big Ten. The original committee that was charged with developing a theological statement in 1968, when they came back in 1972 to the first full general conference, they said, we think that the way forward should be grounded in theological pluralism. The way forward should be grounded in theological pluralism. So it's a Big Ten, lots of different beliefs. And, obviously there's room for different beliefs in a Christian understanding of things that are not basic. Some people believe in infant baptism, some don't. That's not an issue you have to divide over. It can be debated passionately. But the United Methodist tent has now got so big that it really encompasses heresy and all kind of things that come close to heresy, with nobody accountable for doing anything about that. And so the fundamental differences of thought and practice within the UMC are basically the authority of the Bible, and then your Christology. Who is Jesus? What is his mission? What did he come to do? And what's the primary purpose of the church? And what's the role of the church in society? These are all big differences. Just as an example, the United Methodist Communications Department did a survey just a few years ago where they asked lots of lay people in the United Methodist Church to self-identify. Do you consider yourself a traditionalist, a centrist, or progressive? Then after they did that, they asked them questions, theological questions. One of them was, what do you consider to be your primary source for your personal theology? What is the primary source for what you believe? And almost 90% of traditionalists said the Bible, but only 6% of progressives said the Bible. So that's a fundamental difference in how progressives and traditionalists see the role of Scripture in our life. And then on Christology, we have a fair number of United Methodist pastors and bishops who have a different understanding of Jesus. And I'm not going to say this is the majority, but we have a significant minority of clergy who would say things like, Jesus is not the only way to heaven. There is no hell, except the ones we make ourselves. Some of them would say, it's really Jesus may or he may not have been raised from the dead physically. It's not that important. It's the symbolism that counts. And I think, if you're a pastor, you've heard all this from other pastors. If you're in a church, a layperson in a local church like my church, where we've had nothing but traditionalist pastors for 35 years straight, lay people in my church have never heard anything like that from a UMC pastor. They think all UMC pastors are traditionalists, because that's all we know. It's just not true. And so these are big differences that you have to worry about and wonder about. Now, if you may be what's called a compatibilist, you may be a person that says, I see these differences, but I can live with that. That's okay. Let them believe what they want to believe, and I'll believe what I want to believe, and we'll all just stay in this church together. If that's the case, then you don't need to disaffiliate. You can just stay right on and just continue having wide differences in the church. Some of us feel like these are important issues and worth separating over in order to try to get it right. But I'm not trying to tell you what you should believe. You have to make up your own minds. So I just want to give you a few examples. I'm going to give you some quotes. I just want to let people speak for themselves. This is a quote from Ken Collins, who's a seminary professor. He lays out the problem pretty well. He says, in short, will the Methodist Church itself be the master of the Bible, sitting in judgment on the Word of God, offering the pretense that Scripture is always in need of a contemporary correction? Or will the Methodist Church instead be mastered by Scripture, in which revelation will be received as the gracious and remarkable gift that it is? Are we the masters of Scripture, or is Scripture our master? That's the way he's chosen to frame the question. And that is a great, in my opinion, a great way to frame the question for the United Methodist Church. Just some examples. Here's a quote from Bishop Elaine Stanowski. She just retired last year, so she's been retired about 6 months now. She was out in the Pacific Northwest, and she says, when it comes to the Bible, people make choices about which stories they let shape and inform their lives. When they go searching in the Bible, some passages speak to them, and others they set aside. The challenge for people like you and me is to find the good news in the Bible. When we find that, we can let the rest recede into the background. So that, I think, the way I would read that, I think it's a plain reading of it, is she's saying you get to be the judge of what you think is the good news that's in the Bible. So you read along and you find the good news in the Bible, and then you let the rest recede into the background. That's a progressive understanding of Scripture. Here's an example from closer to home. This is the Bishop of Wisconsin, and he could easily be our next bishop. We don't know. I don't have any reason to think that, except that when our bishop retires soon, they rotate the bishops around within the North Central jurisdiction. So this is one of the guys, or one of the bishops, who might be our next bishop. He says, by the leading of God's Holy Spirit, we come to know some things allowed in Scripture are no longer appropriate and valid, and that some condemnations and rules need grace-filled and loving updating. That's also a progressive understanding of the idea that we're going to update the Bible. And I think he's very sincere about that, because I've already heard some of his sermons, and that's the kind of the way he preaches too. Here's one from a United Methodist pastor in California, fairly large church out there, Reverend Frank Schaefer. And he wrote this at the time when, in 2020, early 2021, when Facebook and Twitter were censoring politicians' posts because they thought they were hateful, so they were censoring. So he says, as a progressive Christian minister, I welcome censoring posts on social media that qualifies hate speech. What am I supposed to do with such clear instances of prejudice in the Bible? How can we ignore them as a responsible minister? At the very least, we should attach censorship flags similar to those on Twitter and Facebook. But ideally, we should ban such problematic passages from the Bible altogether. So that's a progressive point of view, is that there's things that are just wrong in there. Anybody heard of Adam Hamilton? Mm-hmm. He's the pastor of the largest United Methodist Church in America. He has a 3-bucket theory of Scripture. There are Scriptures which are timeless truths. Then there are Scriptures which were true at one time because, but now you don't have to follow them. Things like not eating shellfish and not eating pork and things like that. But then he has a 3rd bucket, is things that were just mistakes right from the start. They never were really God's intended message. They were just mistakes right from the start. And so, I don't know. I would hate to have to be the one to try to go through and figure out the parts I thought you could just ignore because they were just mistakes. But that's a very widespread opinion within the United Methodist Church. It's not a majority of our clergy, but it's a significant minority, and it's growing. Here is more of a traditionalist way to think about the Bible. And this is Shane Bishop. He's the pastor of what was the largest United Methodist Church in Illinois, but they disaffiliated last year, so they're not in the UMC anymore. And he's talking about how a lot of people think they're living Christian life, but they're not following the rules, and only God gets to make the rules, and so forth. And then the last sentence he says, when our way of thinking and the clear and consistent teachings of the Bible come into conflict, it is we who must adjust. That's a very traditionalist understanding of Scripture. I'm reading the Bible. I'm going to find verses that I don't like because they strike too close to home, or some of them might actually be offensive to my modern sensibilities. But instead of just dismissing them, I need to ask myself, that's my pastor, he knows I'm talking.
Wait a minute, you're blowing off your pastor?
I'm blowing him off.
I do it all the time.
I'm sorry I'm setting a bad example for you. That's on video, right? But you know, when you come across things you don't understand in the Bible, they're hard to understand. A traditionalist view of that would be, I know that this book, everything in it is a part of God's message to me. I don't understand what he's trying to tell me right here. This seems wrong. I need to dig deeper and try to understand because maybe my thinking is off. That's a traditionalist understanding of Scripture. And so, you know, that whole love your neighbor thing, right? I don't really like that. But I've got to say, maybe I need to adjust my thinking. Maybe that's really something important that I need to learn to live by. So these are just some theological examples. I could give you a lot of examples of bishops and pastors who don't have a solid Christology. I mean, you know, one bishop that teaches that Jesus was prejudiced and bigoted when he started his ministry. He was prejudiced against women, but he saw the error of his ways and he adjusted and he became more, you know, a better person because of it. Things like that you just say, what? I mean, I just don't have time tonight to go through all that stuff with you, but there are lots of things you could read, and I'd be happy to pass along materials to you if you want it. But I just want to show you there are basically profound theological differences within the United Methodist Church, and you have to reach a decision as whether that helps your mission here at this church or not, whether it fits with what you are trying to teach your people here or not. There's another root cause for our problems, and it has to do with organizationally what's going on. And so I just want to make sure everybody understands how the United Methodist Church works. Very few Methodists do, because it's really structured almost exactly like the federal government. And so we have founding documents, right? We have a constitution. The Methodist Church has a constitution. We have a judiciary branch, which is the Judicial Council, and they do the same things our Supreme Court does. They make rulings on whether things are constitutional or not, and they have the final word on how to interpret parts of the script, parts of the Book of Discipline, and parts of the actions that annual conferences take and things like that. And then you have an executive branch, bishops, district superintendents, pastors, general boards and agencies. And then you have the General Conference, which is the legislature. And so, you know, if we ever get to meet, that's 862 delegates from all around the world, 16 from Indiana, 8 clergy and 8 lay. All 8 clergy from Indiana are progressive or centrist-leaning progressive. They all are more of a progressive bent. There's no traditionalists on the clergy part of our delegation. The laity in Indiana tend to be more conservative, so more traditionalist. So 6 out of the 8 lay representatives are like myself, we're traditionalists. So the thing that I really want you to understand here is that this is the separation of powers, the classic, just like the federal government. Only the General Conference can make rules for the entire church. A bishop cannot make or change a rule. Only the General Conference can do that. And yet, General Conference has no administrative authority and no enforcement authority. Only the executive group, the bishops and district superintendents, the pastors, the general boards and agencies, only that group can enforce the rules. And that's their job. I mean, when a pastor is ordained, they take a vow to maintain the good order of the church. Their job is to maintain order and to administer the order of the church. So they're the only ones that can enforce the rules. General Conference is the only one that can make the rules. And so that leads to problems because traditionalists really hold sway or control the rulemaking functions of the UMC. And that's largely because of the Africans. And you may know there's, 20 years ago there were about 1 million United Methodists in Africa. And today there's almost 7 million United Methodists in Africa. That's half the church. They now Africa constitutes over half of the membership of the United Methodist Church worldwide. And they're growing partly because the average age of a United Methodist in America is over 60, and the average age of a United Methodist in Africa is 19. So, and because they are almost 100% theologically traditionalist, when it comes to changing rules on things like human sexuality, rules that the progressive U.S. part of the church desperately wants to change, the Africans say no. And when you put their votes together with traditionalist U.S. delegates like myself, we have enough votes to defeat the progressive agenda at General Conference. So the rules can't be changed really in the near future, or in the past for sure, and probably in the near future. But they can't be enforced either, because the progressives control the bishops and the clergy and the general boards and agencies. We have 4, maybe 5 traditionalist bishops right now. They're all at various stages of retirement or close to retirement. And we have more than 40 other U.S. bishops. They're all progressive and centrist. And so, they control what's going on. So all those compatibility rules, the official teaching in the church is that homosexual practice is incompatible with Christian teaching. Homosexual practice is incompatible with Christian teaching. That rule can't be changed because General Conference delegates won't vote to change it. Now it might be changed in 2024. The delegate count is like it's a within the margin of error. It could go either way, but it hasn't been changed so far. So really, we're in like an impasse. We're stuck, and so bishops and clergy don't like being stuck. So they just decide that we're gonna do what we want regardless of the rules, and that's where we are. This is not a scientific graph. This is just an impression from opinions of a lot of people and from reading what's going on. There used to be every now and then some bishop somewhere like Bishop Melvin Talbert would go down to Alabama in 2013 and perform a same-sex wedding against the rules of the church. So it used to be once or twice a year you hear something like that around the U.S. It began to accelerate after 2012 because the progressives got more militant. And then after 2019, and I don't know how many of you are aware of the 2019 Special General Conference that was supposed to settle all these issues, but had the opposite effect. The progressives were so angry and disappointed that they did not win at that conference. You just had an explosion of defiance. And so, things like about half of the annual conferences in the U.S. that summer passed resolutions urging their bishop to ignore the Book of Discipline and let pastors perform weddings and go ahead and ordain, because we have a rule against you cannot ordain a self-avowed practicing homosexual either. But these general conferences urged their bishop, please ignore those rules in our conference. You had a significant number, maybe approaching half, of all the annual conferences in the U.S. whose boards of ordained ministry issued statements saying, we will not take that into consideration, the homosexual practice. We will not take that into consideration when we approve ministerial candidates. We will not even ask them that question. Even though the Book of Discipline says you have to ask that question. It's plain in the Book of Discipline. You have to ask them that. And if they admit to being a practicing homosexual, then you have to deny them candidacy. Almost half of the boards of ordained ministry in the U.S. said we're not going to take that into consideration. That's just an out-and-out willful violation. And things like that, that summer, at least 8 annual conferences that summer ordained self-avowed practicing homosexuals, openly practicing. So just an explosion of defiance, and it's gotten worse. Let me just give you a couple of examples. I'm going to try to wrap up reasonably quickly here. This is from the Western jurisdiction. All the bishops in the Western jurisdiction, the United States has 5 jurisdictions. We're part of the North Central jurisdiction. There's a Western jurisdiction, which is approximately the western 1/3 of the United States. And all those bishops came together and they said, we are going to offer safe harbor in our jurisdiction. Anywhere west of Kansas, they say that as of January the 1st, 2020, we intend to provide safe harbor for clergy under our care. We do not intend to withhold or challenge ordination based solely on a person's gender, identity, or sexual orientation. We are unwilling to punish clergy who celebrate the marriage of 2 adults of any gender or sexual orientation. And so those are violations of the Book of Discipline. And so the entire Western jurisdiction has said we're going to violate the Book of Discipline from this point forward. This is closer to home, the North Central jurisdiction that we're a part of. This was last fall. A statement was adopted. I was there because if you're a General Conference delegate, you're also a jurisdictional conference delegate. Only there's twice as many of us because there's another 16 that are elected to be jurisdictional conference delegates. So we had 32 from Indiana that were there. This resolution, this is a piece of a long resolution that passed by a vote of about 180 to 32. 12 of the no votes were from our Indiana delegation. But nonetheless, it passed easily with 80% of the delegates passing it and saying that they renounce and reject the spiritual forces and evil powers of colonialism, racism, sexism, classism, and heterosexism. And that we implore all the NCJ to North Central jurisdiction to do no harm. We urge all members of the North Central jurisdiction to avoid pursuing charges for LGBTQ plus clergy and allies. And we request our Episcopal leaders, that's the bishops, dismiss charges related to LGBTQ plus identity or officiating same-gender weddings. So they just urge people to officiate with impunity. We will not restrict God's calling based solely on a candidate's sexual orientation or gender identity. Also, all those things are violations of the Book of Discipline. So that's by a vote of 180, 80% of all the delegates from our area urge the bishop, their bishops to violate the Book of Discipline. Here's a whole annual conference that not only urges, but says we're going to do it. In effect, the Iowa conference has implemented what the Western jurisdiction did. They're now doing the same thing as the Western jurisdiction. Everywhere in the Iowa conference, pastors will be able to choose which weddings they officiate as long as it is 2 consenting adults. Church leadership will be able to determine their own policy regarding weddings. Because right now it's against the Book of Discipline to allow a same-sex ceremony to be performed on church property. The whole conference of Iowa says we're going to let people do whatever they want and we're not going to hold anybody accountable for that. So that's the Iowa official policy right now. This is pretty close to home. This is just down the road in Marion about a month ago, 6 weeks ago maybe. Resolution number 5. We will strive to honor and trust the decisions of clergy to choose which weddings they officiate and congregations to choose which weddings they host, so long as they are between two consenting committed adults. We will seek to not restrict God's calling solely on the basis of candidates' sexual orientation or gender identity. That passed 380 to 332 votes. This would never have passed in the past. We've had resolutions like this come up at annual conferences in the past, and they've never been able to get the right votes to pass. So our conference is moving more and more progressive among the clergy and the lay people even. And I think they're going to see, based on the success of this resolution, you will see much more like it next year. Now, to be fair about it, our bishop has said he doesn't consider this to be binding on him. He doesn't have to follow this because he can still enforce the book discipline if he wants to. He says this is just aspirational. It's not binding on him. And I'm glad for that, except that to me, if you're thinking about the direction the church is going, there's not much difference between passing a resolution that says we will violate the book of discipline versus one that says we aspire to violate the book of discipline. That's pretty similar to me. So, and that's what we did. We just passed a resolution that says we aspire to do something completely against the policies and polity of the church. I just want to show you that it's not just me who sees these things. Bishop Mike Lowry retired last year from one of the Texas conferences. I don't remember which one. And he recently became an advisor to the Global Methodist Church. And so in the process of doing that, he resigned from the Council of Bishops. And he said in his letter, he said, regretfully, I perceive that the United Methodist Church has strayed in significant ways from faithfully upholding its own stated discipline, and even more so, departed from the full truth of the gospel. That's a pretty strong statement when you have a bishop who is in the know. I mean, he's got a seat at the table at the highest level of our denomination. He sees all things going on in our denomination level. And he says, the mighty United Methodist Church has departed from the full truth of the gospel. Is he the only one? Nope. Bishop Scott Jones just announced he was going to retire early. This was about a month ago. And he's eligible to serve 2 more years, and people thought he would serve 2 more years. But he retired early, saying, the increasing disobedience of bishops, annual conferences, jurisdictional conferences, and agencies of the UMC makes my service as a general superintendent more and more difficult. So he's resigned early. Now, these were 2 out of the 4 or 5 conservative bishops that I was telling you about. So now we're down to just 2 or 3 conservative bishops out of the 40 plus in the U.S. And is there more of this coming? I think so. This is Bishop Thomas Bickerton. He's the president of the Council of Bishops, and he's a very progressive bishop. And he was giving an interview recently, and he was talking about the General Conference. And he said, part of our paralysis, he was answering a question from the interviewers saying, what kind of hope can you give to people like myself who want to see us move into a more inclusive church? And he said, part of our paralysis is that we are dependent on a meeting that has been dysfunctional for 50 years, and it hasn't borne much fruit. So he's talking about General Conference. And he says, the postponement of General Conference is a good thing. We've been given permission, maybe it's self-appointed permission, to move ahead. And I think that's telling that he is self-aware enough to realize that he's usurping the permission. He plans for his vision is for the Council of Bishops to move ahead with implementing their vision of a more inclusive church. And then he pauses. He says, well, maybe it's self-appointed permission. Yes, it is. That's true. He doesn't have that authority, but he's going to do it. how do we solve the problem? We have to separate. Some churches have to separate. It won't be the majority. Anybody here ever heard of the protocol for reconciliation and
Yes.
grace through separation that might have passed at General Conference, but we never got a chance to pass it? It probably won't pass, ever. That would have created a situation where churches could leave peacefully and easily, and I think we would have had 20 to 25% of all the United Methodist churches in the U.S. would have separated. I think now, because it's harder and it's expensive and all these things, it's a tortured path to get there. We may only end up with 10%, maybe even less than that slightly of the churches that will leave. But there will be a significant number of churches that are leaving. And like I was saying earlier, a lot of them will be here in Indiana. So that's where we are. We have to separate. I'm not going to belabor this, but we're not going to get a chance to pass this protocol, which would have allowed churches to separate for free and join the Global Methodist Church. We're not going to get a chance to have that. The people that are more sophisticated than me, who understand the delegate count, just don't think we have the votes to pass that anymore without progressive permission. Because the African delegates, who are 100% theologically conservative, are very conflicted about this separation issue. They like the United Methodist Church. They get a lot of financial support, and the name and the brand is very positive for them because they do a lot of good in Africa and they're growing rapidly. They don't want us to do anything to disrupt their growth. So we probably couldn't get more than half of the African votes, and without much more than that, we couldn't pass the protocol. Churches that are separating, how can you do it? There are at least 4 ways to do it. One of them is not available, and the other 2 are bad. Hard ways to go. You could close your church. You could just turn the keys over to your property, to the conference, and close it, and then buy it back from them if you want to. Some churches who have only like an acre out in the middle of a cornfield, and the church is 100 years old and it's in bad repair, this is a good option because the conference is going to, the conference is going to tell them you have to pay $50,000 to disaffiliate. They close the door, they give the key to the conference. The conference says, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do with that piece of worthless property? We'll sell it back to you for $5,000." Oh, okay, $5,000. So they buy it back. It's a rare circumstance that it can be done, but it can be done in some circumstances. I was talking to a church the other day who had an assessment on their property. They think their property is worth about $800,000, but they have almost $700,000 in a mortgage. The conference will not want to touch that property either. They probably can negotiate something cheaper than their disaffiliation cost. Most churches in Indiana, this will be a bad way because the conferences say, "Thank you very much. We can sell that for a lot more than your disaffiliation fee." The last resort is just that. It's a case of you say, "You know what, we're just going to not participate in the United Methodist Church anymore. We're not going to accept any of your pastoral appointments. We're not going to send you any money. We're going to take your name off of our doors. We're not going to acknowledge you. If you call down here, we're not going to talk to you. And so just leave us alone." And what they'll probably do almost certainly is sue you, and they'll send somebody down here in the middle of the night, change locks on your doors, seize your property. If you don't believe to do that they will do that, then Google Mount Bethel United Methodist Church in Marietta, Georgia. I just think that's a super risky way to go. You'd have to get your lawyers lined up and be all ready to go. The only thing and number 2 is just not available. The bishops have complete control over that paragraph. It's a paragraph which, if they wanted to, they could let you leave under more favorable terms, but they just don't want to. So really, the only way to do it is paragraph 2553. It expires at the end of next year.
I have a copy of that here.
So that's great. And so you've got, you've got 2 chances to make it out. If you wanted to leave that, and I'm not suggesting that you should disaffiliate. So please don't hear me say your church needs to disaffiliate. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying a lot of churches are. I've told you a lot of the reasons why. If you identify with any of those reasons, and you may have your own separate reasons, and if you want to disaffiliate, then certainly you're able to do that now. And the way it would work is you have to have a discernment period with you and the congregation. Your leadership and your congregation. And by the way, this is a lay-led thing. Your pastor can gently let his position be known, but he cannot be seen as pressuring people one way or the other, or coercing people. That's really not proper. He's not even a member of your church. He's a member of the conference. So it's up to the lay people. And so you would have to institute, you as a council here would have to say, we think we ought to start informing our congregation and talking about this and seeing what they want to do. And then you would get to design your own discernment process. It ought to have informational meetings. It ought to have question and answer periods. It ought to have disbursement of information. It ought to have time for the congregation to ask questions and get answers. It ought to have focused prayer time where you ask everybody to pray. Maybe some churches are saying everybody pray at noon on every day for 15 minutes or something, you know. But something to help people discern what they really think is the right thing to do. And you have to, about the time you start that, you really need to inform your conference superintendent, by the way, we're starting our discernment period. And at some point along there, you can ask them to please send you your cost estimate for how much it would cost you. I don't know if you've done any of that at all.
Not yet.
No.
I've got some of that prepared for tonight.
So that would be something that you'd have to do at some point in time. It used to be that was the first step, that you could ask for your cost estimate and they would send it to you. It would have to be your council chair. You'd have to be the one to write your conference superintendent and say, please give me your cost estimate. More and more, the conference superintendents are saying, well, I'll only give it to you after you go through your discernment period with your congregation. So you may have to get that, you may be further along before you can actually get that cost estimate. And then at some point in time, after your congregation discerns and after you've taken some straw polls so that you know about what they're thinking, and you're pretty sure you could get 2/3 vote, to pass, because you have to have 2/3 of the congregational members have to say, we want to disaffiliate. And all professing members get to vote if they want to. They get to come and vote, even if they haven't been here in 5 years. If you think you can get the 2/3 vote, then great. You would call the conference superintendent or send them another email and say, please schedule our vote. And then they'll do that. They'll come and they'll conduct the vote. And then you'll see, if you get the 2/3, hey, you're almost home. Then you have to fill out all the paperwork, get all the paperwork done and everything, and be ready for the vote at the annual conference. If you don't think you can get 2/3 vote, you got to think seriously about whether or not, or if it's borderline, whether or not you really want to take a vote, because it can be very divisive. If you think about it, let's say you got 65% instead of 66 and 2/3% of your congregation voting. Now you're not going to get to disaffiliate, but now you've got 65% of your congregation who really wanted to. They're mad now. Some of them will leave and take their donations with them. People are going to leave no matter what. You cannot escape. You're going to lose members one way or the other. If you don't do this, you're going to lose members. If you do it, you're going to lose some of your more progressive members. There's just no way to avoid that. So that's a little bit about the process. You got to do this payment thing, and I'm not going to belabor that, but there's various components that go into the payment thing. You've got these deadlines. You've got one chance at November 19th. For you guys, that's probably a little rushed. If you're going to really try to make a church this size, if you're going to try to make that November 19th day, you probably should have started around the 1st of June. You might still make it, but you've got to have your vote by October 1st. So you've got 2.5 months to do your discernment and to get your vote scheduled. So that's a strong date. Other than that, your next chance is next summer. After that, there are no chances. It could maybe theoretically be a chance if the bishop is willing to call a special annual conference late next year, like he is this year. But if he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to, and so then you miss your chance next summer. So you got really these 2 dates that you can control. I'm not going to belabor the Global Methodist Church. I think it's the best option for churches. The thing I love about it, low overhead, low bureaucracy, low apportionments. They just announced, I haven't even had time to change my slide. By book of discipline, by their own book of discipline, the maximum they can charge you for their, what they call connectional funding, is 6.5%. But they just announced yesterday they're starting out with a 2% request. So if you're paying your full conference tithe here, you're paying more like 11%. But in the Global Methodist Church, you would be paying 2%. And then you would own your property outright, no trust clauses, no nothing, no claims. And it would be a conservative Orthodox belief system. It costs nothing to join and nothing to leave. To join, you just take a vote of your congregation, and if a majority want to join, then you're in. At any point in time you want to leave, you take another vote of the congregation. If a majority wants to leave, you're out. No cost either way. Okay, I won't belabor that, but I'll just say, if you want to know more about what's going on in the United Methodist Church, the single best source is peopleneedjesus.net. Click on that button, Fallout, and what you'll see there is a link to every article ever written about this concept. Thousands of them. Now, you can't read thousands of articles. Most of you can. I wouldn't ask you to try. But you can scroll down about the top 20 or 30. Take a couple of hours and read the top 20 or 30 things that are being said. And he puts everything on there. Progressive points of view, centrist point of view, traditional point of view, tweets from bishops, Facebook posts from leaders. He's got a link to everything that's ever been written or said about this. And the person that runs this is another Illinois bishop. Not a bishop, a pastor in Illinois. Anyway, if you want to know more about the Global Methodist Church, globalmethodist.org, and you got plenty of time to think about that and talk about that when the time comes. Ooh, okay. So, I'll be happy to answer any questions I got, or...
So at this time, can I kind of give an overview of what we're thinking and then get kind of your thoughts on where we're at? So obviously we've been dealing with this for quite a while, actually several pastors ago, and I don't think they have a copy of that. I've been a chair for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it's been on the agenda item that we've talked about, and we really didn't, it kept changing, so we didn't get anywhere with it. Yeah. Well, it's kind of come to a head, obviously, in the last few years. And we've been trying to figure out how to go about things within the council. Mm-hmm. John Bowman is one of our Sunday school class teachers, and he was trying to figure out what to do next on the agenda for his group. And it came to him and his group that they were going to look at this, kind of study this a little bit.
Yeah.
It happened right about the time when we were having discussions about what we were going to do, what the church should do, how we should go about getting this word out. So it really fell into place in kind of a weird, I wouldn't say weird, in kind of a, I think, inspired way.
Amen.
So John and I started talking about that and tried to figure out what we could do about it. And one of the things that kind of made sense was, let's bring all of the Sunday school classes together in one group and do this, not just have just one group do it. Let's do it together, and then let's invite the whole congregation. Mm-hmm. So as we started going through that, we started doing some research on timing and stuff like that, and found out that we were behind the 8 ball in this thing. So we put together a plan. We want to keep all our options open. It doesn't make sense to go down this path and talk about a certain option, but we don't even have that option. Mm-hmm. So we set this up so it would be 5 weeks starting July 31st on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. At least that's what we're proposing. Now, this has to be approved by council. I'm just bringing it up so we talk about it. And this is trying to be as impartial as possible, getting all the information out, discussing the details of this, and hearing what people have to say, understanding it, and trying to find out where we're at and where we think we should go. At the end of that 5 weeks, we'll do a straw poll. And then if things work out, we have the potential to vote on, I think I said the 28th of September? 18th of September, which would be 2 weeks, the 2 week cooling off period before the October 1st requirement to be complete. Right. And then looking at some of these things, we had talked about, I think we need to send a letter to the district superintendent right now if we agree that that's what we want to do, and say, look, this is just an option. We want this date. This is our process we're going through. We want to know how much it would cost, because we have to have that if we're going to make a decision. We have to know, can we even physically or financially do it? So that's one option, is that. There are other options of staying. There are other, and even if we did leave, where would we go? I'm not trying to push any direction. I'm just trying to make sure that we have all the options on the table so that we're truly looking at this from a realistic standpoint of what we are facing. So that's kind of where we're coming from. We would have a letter that would go out to the whole congregation by snail mail, and then email, and then newsletter, and then in church, and then open this up to everybody to talk.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you is, do you see issues with that, or do you have any guidance or thoughts?
That all sounds real reasonable. It's very similar to what churches are doing. So my own church that I'm a member of, we're trying to disaffiliate. Probably. We think that's where we're going. We're kind of in the middle of our discernment process. We sent our first, we've laid out a series of 4 letters to the entire membership, giving them pieces of information in each letter. And I'm not sure this is the right way to do it, but we just felt like, man, some of this is, I don't know if we want to give them every fact right at the start. So we started off by just saying, hey, here's what's going on in the church, these problems. Then the second letter is, there is a disaffiliation process if we decide we want to leave. You know, we want to discern that. We want your help in discerning that. Then the third letter is going to be the details of Mount Auburn's, what would our payments be, what would our next steps be. For instance, in our church, the biggest discussion we've been having was among the council, and I'm the president of the trustees, but the biggest discussion was, you know, what are we going to do after we disaffiliate? Because a lot of churches are just choosing to be independent. That is a really hard way to go. I think people have to really think seriously about that, real hard. And if you're interested in that, I can talk more about that. And then there's other denominations you could go to, Free Methodist, Wesleyan, Nazarenes, you know, different things like that. But those have all got their own culture and their own, they've been in existence for 100 years or more. Some of them over 150 years. So they've got their own ethos or atmosphere or culture or feel, which will feel odd to you, probably. The Global Methodist Church is where we're headed, I think. But we just felt like we cannot ask our congregation to vote on disaffiliation unless they know where we're going to next. So some churches are just the opposite. They want to get the disaffiliation vote first, and then they want to think about it. They want to be independent for maybe a year while they think about what to do next. That's okay, but our particular congregation would not vote. We would lose a bunch of disaffiliation votes if they had no idea. If you can't tell me where we're going to go to, I don't want to go. You know. So anyway, so I think what you're doing is what your plan is right on target. I do urge you, if this group agrees and gives you permission to do it, that you try to get your superintendent to schedule you a date, a disaffiliation date.
And I have that.
Because here's what's happening is, like I said, I think there's between 150 and 200 churches right now working on this disaffiliation thing. And I'm beginning to sense panic at the conference level. Because
that's kind of what I was reading.
Because they just are overwhelmed. They don't have the resources to do it.
If you wait till the last minute, there might not be any spots
because they have to be present, wait till that first or second week of September and say, I want to get something scheduled for later this month, I think you're going to hear, I'm all booked up. Sorry. So if you want to have any chance of, in November 19th, maybe too early for you guys, but if you want to have any chance at it, you've got to get a date on the schedule right away.
I really have no sense of where people stand. And John, I think, is he's steering the ship as far as this goes, and that's great because it's not a part of the council. It's not. It's just being done independently. And I think, but some of the questions he's asking are going to be very critical to us figuring out. Where do we stand?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, that's right.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
The disaffiliation fee, is there some kind of formula?
Yes.
Or it's not just arbitrary, right?
No, it's not arbitrary at all. It's very formulaic, and because of that, they won't negotiate it at all. It is what it is. Based on the information that Jeff gave me about your church's budget and his salary and things like that, my prediction would be your disaffiliation cost is going to be about $285,000.
Dear Lord in heaven.
Now,
That's better than buying the church back.
Well, I get that.
when you get the number from them, I think it'll be something like 305 or 310 or something, because, and people, you have to look at that. There will be four numbers. There will be, five numbers in there. The first number that they quote you is the cost, the amount that you have to pay for your property and your building and so forth. And that'll be zero. They want to make it plain in the contract that they're not charging anything for your property. You're not paying anything for that. The second number will be, the unfunded pension liability, your share of the unfunded pension liability. That's the huge number. That's the biggest piece of the number. Then there'll be one that has to do with the unfunded, your share of the conference's unfunded retiree health insurance subsidy fund. And that's not a huge number, but it's not tiny either. Then there will be 1 year of apportionments. And so, if your apportionments, I think something what Jeff told me, you're somewhere in the range of $47,000 to $50,000. So there'll be a number for that. Then there'll be a number for past due apportionments, or apportionments which you have not paid yet. And there will be a number in that slot, even if you're caught up. And the reason is, if you ask for your cost estimate right now, they're assuming that you're shooting for the November date, and they will do your calculation based on that you're going to be out and disaffiliated on December 1. Right now, they might not even have your June payment recorded in their books. They probably do, but they may only have May recorded in their books. So they're going to say, I don't know if they're going to make June, July, August, September, and October, and November's payments or not. And so they'll calculate the value of those and stick it in there. So there'll be an extra 20 to 25,000 stuck on this estimate. That's not really extra cost. I'm just warning you, so when you see it, you'll say, oh, that's not really extra cost. We were going to pay that anyway. But the extra cost, not including that figure, the extra cost I'm thinking is going to be about $285,000, give or take 10%. So it could be $20,000 or $25,000 either way.
Well, and these are important things because, that has to come into play.
Absolutely.
We don't have the ability to make those
If
payments.
you don't have a way to pay
there's no
that,
reason then considering disaffiliation doesn't make any sense.
if you don't have a way to pay it, you're done, because that's not negotiable.
When is it due?
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
It's due as late as the day before you're officially out. So let's say you did get done in time to get this November 19th vote, and you've got everything in line, then you will be disaffiliated on December 1. So no later than November 30th, you have to transfer the money into the conference's account, lump sum. They won't take partial payments or anything. Now you can make partial payments by financing it. You could go and borrow against the building from a commercial bank or somewhere. So but you have to collect that whole lump sum and give it to the conference. Then if you borrow that, then you can make payments over the next 10 years if you wanted to, But a lot of churches are averse to borrowing unless you absolutely have to. And some churches, I don't know if you're familiar with Dayton United Methodist Church, just south of Lafayette, Dayton, Indiana, a big church, and their fee was $480,000, and they were starting to talk about how to raise it. And one wealthy member said, "I'll match whatever we can raise from the rest of the congregation." and they raised about $380,000 in a 2-week period just from within the congregation. So don't underestimate your congregation's willingness, but that's a tall order for most congregations. Most congregations are not going to come up with that much money, but you maybe, out of that 285, maybe you can come up with 30 or 40 or 50,000 just from extra, special contributions from the congregation. Some churches are borrowing against their building. Some churches have a piece of property they can sell. My own church, just for an example, 20 years ago, we leased a little corner of our property to a cell tower company. And we've been collecting $20,000 a year income off of that for 20 years. We can monetize that. They will give us a lump sum right now of about $400,000.
J.G. Wentworth.
It's the cell tower company, but it's the same kind of thing. So our fee is $554,000. But we're going to be able to get about $400,000 of that from the cell tower, monetizing the cell tower lease. But anyway, I'm sorry. You have a
I
question?
have 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
One has to do with timing. We talk about this October 1st deadline in order to disaffiliate now. There's also a June of next year timeframe.
Yes.
Why would we necessarily want to focus on getting to October 1 as opposed to just kick the bucket down the road and shoot for the June timeframe?
Yep. Great question. And I think you do not want to rush to that October 1st date. If you can do it, if you sense that, hey, our congregation is with us, they're ready to vote, and we can get 2/3, then I think you ought to proceed as fast as you can without any rush. It's like, it's the difference between kind of walking leisurely towards something or walking leisurely but stopping to take a break every 15 minutes. Don't take any breaks. If you can do this in an orderly, leisurely fashion, in a fashion that brings your congregation with you, you ought to get it done as fast as you can, because we don't know what can happen. These are minor points, but I think they're indicators of some bigger problems. In the beginning, churches that disaffiliated this summer, they had a much easier process. Even the pastor could call and say, give us our cost estimate, and 2 days later they would have their cost estimate. They could then talk among their congregation, have maybe one meeting, and 2 weeks after they got their cost estimate, they could call the superintendent and say, we want to have a vote. They say, okay, great, I'll be there next week. And then they get their vote, they get their paperwork together, they're out. That's why those 29 churches didn't even have any thought about doing this until the last week of March. And basically in the months of April and May, they got everything done that needed to be done. It cannot be done in 2 months now. It can't be done because the conference has all these extra requirements. First you got to have this disaffiliation process. Well, tell me what your disaffiliation process is. Well, I don't think that's really a good one. They might add things. You might find that they're going to insist that you have, increasingly, it's not always the case, but increasingly, they are forcing a church to have speakers come from the conference level to speak to your whole congregation and explain to them why you should not disaffiliate. So you have to have, now, not every conference is doing that, and not every district is doing that, but some of them are. And then, the whole idea about borrowing, the new controversy, a lot of those 29 churches borrowed against their building to pay. Now you've got at least one conference superintendent, and I don't know, who's your conference superintendent?
Russ Abel.
Russ is the one. Russ says, I will not schedule any, because if you want to borrow money against your building, you have to have a charge conference, which is basically you guys, plus any retired pastor to attend here, would have to vote and approve the church borrowing money. You cannot have a charge conference unless the district superintendent calls it and presides over it. And Russ right now is saying, I will not authorize any charge conferences for churches to borrow against their building for purposes of paying the disaffiliation fee.
But didn't Russ say at the meeting you and I attended that he would not stop anybody from leaving? Made it sound like he was
He's not gonna stop you from leaving,
No, but he's gonna
he's
make
just
it
gonna stop you
difficult.
from borrowing money to leave. Now,
But
that's not the,
It's the
that's,
same.
that's not the
It's
absolute.
not the impression he left with people.
Well, I know, but I'm just telling you, I've talked to him personally, because I heard this rumor. And you know, Russ, I consider Russ almost a friend, because he's the head of our General Conference delegation. So I meet with Russ all the time, and I talk to him all the time. And I called him and I said, Russ, you know, I heard this rumor that the conference is not letting people borrow. He said, I'm the one that started that. And he said, now I'm waiting for the bishop to tell me whether he's gonna uphold my ruling on that or not. And so we've gotten some influential people to write letters urging the bishop to overrule that. And I could give you all the book of discipline paragraphs that Russ is relying on, and then all the reasons why the bishop has the power to override it and all that. And some churches are just getting around it by saying, well, then we'll just borrow without a charge conference. We're just going to have our own little conference without it. We'll go to a third-party bank. We won't try to borrow from the conference foundation. We'll go to a third-party bank. They don't even know we're supposed to have a charge conference. They don't even care. They'll loan us the money if we're creditworthy, and we'll just get on with it. Or, at least one church I know is saying that they're borrowing the money from their members.
That's what I was worried about.
They borrow the money from the members, and then as soon as you disaffiliate, you refinance your building, and you pay them back. So there's ways around this, but my point is, the conference keeps coming up with reasons and extra requirements and extra hoops for you to jump through. The biggest risk, and I think it's small, but it's, you know how you analyze risks as being, probability is high or low or medium, but the consequences can be high. So you can have a very low probability risk with a huge consequence. Well, that is that we might get a new bishop in January. Because our bishop wants to work 2 more years. He doesn't legally have that right, but the judicial councils ruled that they're gonna hold that rule in abeyance, and they're gonna allow him and others like him to stay on 2 more years. But a rumor I'm hearing at the Committee on Episcopacy of the North Central Jurisdiction is that they are thinking about shuffling all of the bishops in the North Central Jurisdiction. So that might mean, for example, the bishop in Iowa is on a medical leave and she's not expected to return. She has a severe illness that may be debilitating illness. The rumor is that they're going to send Bishop Trimble back to Iowa, where he came from for his last 2 years, and we'll get a new bishop. We may get a bishop who says, why are you letting so many churches disaffiliate this easy? From now on, I want to start charging them half of the value of their property. Because lots and lots of bishops are doing that. The bishops get to make up whatever they want to, rules for this. So Bishop Trimble's playing it pretty straight right now, but other annual conferences all around the country, you have to get a real estate assessment on your property, and you have to pay half the value of your property as part of your fee. So you might, instead of paying $285,000, you might have to pay $1,285,000 or $2,285,000 or something like that. I think it's a small risk, but it is a risk with big consequences. That's why I say, get out as fast as you can, but do it, but not faster than you can, than you'll regret later. You don't want to make your congregation feel like you're pressuring them, you know? That's a long-winded answer, I'm sorry.
That's our second question was that, do you know what happens to endowment funds that we have?
The endowment funds you get to keep unless there's some kind of a restrictive language in the charter for them. You have to look at the language in your endowment charter, and if it has language which says something like, can only be used for the benefit of the United Methodist Church or something, you may not. They may rule that you can't keep that. Now, our endowment at our church has a clause in it which gives the charge conference the right to change the rules and change the bylaws of the endowment. So we could have a charge conference if we have to make that endowment fund be eligible. Some people have grants and have trusts that people left estates that pay out. We have one person who left several $1 million to a community foundation, of which Mount Auburn is one of the beneficiaries. But the foundation, the person who administers that fund has already said, you know, the language is not restrictive enough. She said, I'll keep sending you the checks every year. So you got to look into the legal aspects of it.
So if we disaffiliate, the pastor is his conference pastor, not our pastor.
Absolutely.
So we would have to find a pastor.
Well, the pastor makes his own decision. So if your pastor wanted to stay with the church, and if you disaffiliate, he could in effect resign from his membership of the United Methodist Conference here. And if you join a new denomination, he could seek ordination in that new denomination. For example, the Global Methodist Church would take Jeff in a heartbeat. And the Global Methodist Church is keeping pastors with their church if they so desire. They wouldn't move him. So if you got disaffiliated and you joined the Global Methodist Church, and if Jeff decided that's what he wanted to do too, then he would still be your pastor. Otherwise, you have to seek a pastor from whatever denomination you join, or if you're going to be independent, you just have to find your own. You just have to, do your own thing.
But what about his retirement? If we disaffiliate, what about his retirement?
His retirement, everything he's invested in, that he is vested, if you understand investing, most people do. Everything he's invested in so far transfers intact completely over to, if he joins the Global Methodist Church, it would just transfer over to the Global Methodist churches they're also using Westpac to administer their pensions. Any future contributions into his retirement would be up to whatever denomination you transfer into, whatever program they have, or if you're independent, it would just be up to this council. You guys could say, we're done with making contributions to your account, or you could say, or you can say, hey, we love you. We're gonna double down. We're gonna put twice as much money as we've been putting in there. Because so that all is taken care of. That's I don't know. I don't think anybody is worried about their retirement benefits that's moving. I don't know, Jeff. You haven't heard anything bad about that, have you?
No.
Is that part of what we're paying into for that? The unmatched, you said, parts of it?
Not really, no.
Unfunded.
Unfunded, like a lot of these industries, so you think of this as like the church industry. If you don't have it, because you're in engineering, but a lot of clients who are in a multi-employer pension system, if you want to withdraw, you have to fund the unpaid pension liabilities. They have actuaries come in, they say this is unfunded. So I've got one client, it would cost him $2 million to withdraw from the multi-employer plan. Mark, I'm sure you've dealt with that a lot. And it's going up all the time, because the first time this guy checked it was $1.5 million. Last time he checked it was over $2 million.
Yeah, our conference has an $89 million unfunded pension liability when you calculate it on what they call a market basis. Which is a super conservative way to do it. On a funding basis, what actually we call a funding basis, it's fully funded. But when you calculate the other way, it's underfunded, and the Book of Discipline requires them to calculate the other way. They're not playing games with this. The conference is playing it straight up. They're required to calculate this way, and so you have to pay your share of that $89 million before you leave. It doesn't have anything to do with his pensions.
Any more questions?
Yeah, the churches that have already disaffiliated, do you have a sense of what they might do? Are they independent right now, or is the global already up and running? And
yeah, the Global Methodist Church is up and running, and so out of those 29, 5 of them instantly became Global Methodist Churches. They just worked it all together. So that the day after they disaffiliated, they affiliated with the Global Methodist Church. The pastors all transferred on that same day. And so we have these 5 churches. One of them is a church in paper only. I don't understand it fully, but it has to do with you had to keep the church name going because they had a huge multi-million-dollar endowment that they had to keep And so it's not even, doesn't even have a building anymore, it's just on paper. And it's administered by one of the other 4 churches. So there's 4 active churches that are now Global Methodist churches in Indiana. What used to be St. Luke's in Kokomo is now called the Connection Church. What used to be Dayton United Methodist Church in Dayton is now called the Gathering Point Church. Martinsville First United Methodist Church decided to just stick with, to just drop the United there now, Martinsville Methodist Church. Martinsville First Methodist Church, yeah. And then the Garden at Gethsemane in Muncie just dropped the Gethsemane part, they're just called the Garden. They're a Global Methodist Church. So those 4, and they're all churches about the size of this church or so. Maybe some of them are a little bigger. Like I think Dayton is bigger probably. But you know, they're all about the size. Now the rest of those churches, a few of them are doing things like joining loose congregational associations, like there's a group called the Independent Methodist Association, and it's congregational in nature, but they kind of affiliate with each other. I wouldn't like it because up until this year, there was none of these churches in Indiana. It's a southern thing, and it's very fundamentalist, so I wouldn't like it. But that's what some of them are doing, and about half of them are just remaining independent. And the smallest ones seem to be, they just feel like they've gotten nothing out of the denomination. They've got nothing, the conference has done nothing to help them. They don't want to re-affiliate with any denomination. I think that's a really hard way to go. You have to make up your own theology, just as an example. Now you can cut and paste it from somewhere, but you have to have your own statement of beliefs. If you're an independent church, you can put out anything you want to on your statement of beliefs. You know, so it's a hard way to go. But anyway, that's what's happening. And by the way, we have pastors that are joining that aren't even got churches yet. So there's probably about 10 or 12 Global Methodist pastors in Indiana that have switched their ordination over into the Global Methodist Church.
Anyone else? So, John, I was wondering if maybe you could take a few minutes and kind of give an overview what you're thinking, or what, you know, how you see this program working for the next 5 weeks. I kind of put you in the spot, sorry about that.
Well, you caught me off guard, but other than that, I halfway expected it.
You're a facilitator, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I can throw it around just almost as good as he can. Not quite. The series, looking at a series of 5 Sunday school lessons, if you want to call them those. And the first one being very general in nature. Really getting just getting our feet wet. A lot of you have already been exposed to quite a bit of it. We're going to have people that we're talking to that have never even heard of this. They don't even know that it's an issue. They don't know what any of the issues are, and our job is going to be to educate them. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's also to educate ourselves, because the more you find out about this, the more you find out you don't know. And so that first meeting is going to be just us really going to focus on what's our basis that we're going to make a decision on. What do we use to measure this with, if you want to call it that? What do we think of the Bible? What do we think of the book of discipline? That's the kind of thing for the first meeting. The second meeting then will focus on what is the issue and what are the points. So what do we as an organization, what's caused this to come about, if you want to call it that? So that we sit down and say, okay, what's one of those is, let's just talk about homosexuality. That's one of the pieces. One of the pieces he talked very nicely about tonight. Tonight was the fact that everybody's just doing their own thing and do whatever rules or whatever seems to want to go by them. That's an issue by itself, separate from the whole issue of whether homosexuality and how you look at it. And you've got the traditional view and the progressive view. I gotta change one of my slides because I use the liberal and conservative.
Well, use whatever you think is appropriate.
Well, I like your terms.
Yeah.
I'll change those. But, and that second meeting, I see that one really becoming very eye-opening for a lot of people, because what they have to understand is, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what they think, and they're gonna have to come to grips themselves. Am I in this camp or I'm in this camp? Where am I? Because each one of you is going to be asked somewhere along the way to put the rubber meets the road. You've got to decide. Not you can't kick the can off to somebody else. You've got to decide. That's second meeting. Third meeting is going to be focused on organization and procedure and process, so that they understand how this Methodist organization works, how that might look at under other organizations, what are those options of going to different other organizations, and so that they say, okay, what I've got is, I've got a general understanding, I now know what the issue is, and if I like those issues, here are my options. And then down to the fourth one, and the fourth one and fifth one are really targeted at this point being more of a town meeting. We've educated everybody. Let's get all the questions on the table and do our best job of answering those questions.
Well, that sounds like a really good plan.
And then we end with the straw poll.
I say what?
A straw poll, and that straw poll.
Yeah, it's interesting you should ask about the straw poll, because what I've done is, so far, just to let you know, I've pretty much got the first week done. I'm about half done with the second week. That's how far we are on this. This is difficult to put together, because one of the things I am very much working hard at doing is making it non-prejudicial.
Yeah.
I am trying my hardest to illustrate this in a balanced format, so that everybody has the information that they need to be able to make this decision. I lost my thought here for a second.
The straw poll.
Straw poll. At the front of my first two sessions, the very first thing we're going to do is take a survey, and I've got it on a grid. And the survey the first week deals with your view of the Bible and your view of the Book of Discipline. And the second week, I forgot. My memory's
If I
bad.
remember correctly, it had to do with
I've got it over here if you
the
want.
homosexuality and what their belief is in that, and what they believe,
Yeah,
how
homosexuality.
to feel about people in the church.
And then what you believe homosexuals should be active in the church. Should you just accept them to be in the church? Can you accept them as members? Can you accept them as leadership in the church? Can you accept them as bishops and pastors in the church? So, and you then take that and you draw there's squares. You pick a square. You say, okay, this is me. And we're going to collect all those this is me's at the front of the meetings. And share that with everybody that says, here's a picture of us.
Anonymously.
And I see doing that in each of those meetings, changing the complexion of that, so that when we get down to the straw poll, it's not earth-shattering. That they're going to be used to the idea of having to folks, what do they believe in? What do they think? Okay, here's the deal. We got to make a decision. What do you think?
And there's we don't have to take a vote. We don't have to move forward on that vote if we don't want to. That's so what I did, and thank you for that, John. What I did is develop a letter to go to the congregation, kind of on behalf of the church council, explaining this process, not really getting into the details of, maybe explaining a little bit that we've got a situation so they don't go, what are you talking about? So I give a little bit of history, and I say, we're gonna have these meetings, and it kind of invites them to the meetings. John has graciously agreed to mail them all at his expense tomorrow if we agree to it. And then Diana will email those same things out. We'll discuss it in church on Sunday to make sure that it's again brought up, and then it'll go in the newsletter as well. So the idea would be we get this information out to everybody. Nobody should miss this. But we need to decide as a congregation, do we want to move forward with this as a process? So as a council, we have to vote on that. I also developed a letter explaining this exact process and that we are doing this. I just want to set a date for them in the outside chance that we would want to vote. I mean, we can bail at any time. We'll let them know 2 weeks before that, or 3 weeks before when we're done with the straw poll, whether we're going to vote. But if we don't get in and set that time, and I also ask for how much is it going to cost, because we need these things to make decisions. And I don't think it makes sense to go through a process like this without having all of your options in front of you. It would be kind of pointless. Why would we, I mean, yes, we can inform ourselves, but if we can't actually come up with a rational decision without any of the information, or one of the decisions isn't even a possibility, or maybe different 6 months from now, I think that's a really difficult way to make people, it's tough enough what we're going to be going through, let alone if you throw a wild card in there, this option might not even work.
Yeah.
So that is my thought on it. I'm going to pass these out for you guys to review, take a few minutes to read through, and let's see, this one is,
Yeah, I'm gonna
Well,
slip out.
that is fine. Thank you for coming, we appreciate
I'll
it.
just say a couple of things before I go. Thanks for having me. Just got my cell phone number. I'll talk to anybody and answer questions. If you want to call me anytime, and I've got like probably 20 documents that would be helpful to you, or at least would give you some examples of some of the things you're thinking about already. Like I've got a 10-page document that lists free Methodists, Nazarenes, all these things, pros and cons of each one, and those kind of things that we used in our church. And I'm mailing it to whoever wants it. It's a starting point. It would give you some I've just got a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years with all kind of churches. So it would give you something that